And just a note that today is recorded, so we will be disseminating and sharing this presentation with everyone who registered, so they can also partake in finding creative ways to acquire new donors. My name is Alyssa Wright. I'm the principal and lead consultant at Wright Collective. We're a community-driven agency of 9 women consultants throughout the globe, and I am on beautiful Wabanaki lands today in Maine, and it is almost 80 degrees, if you can believe it, in New England in October. So I am enjoying the sunshine coming into my office and getting to be with you all. Today's conversation and topic, I think, is a really important one. As many of you probably know, household giving is down across the United States and the middle class are struggling, and it's been really hard to acquire new donors. So today we're going to be talking a lot about just some creative ideas to continue to find not only individuals who have wealth and access to wealth to help grow your high net worth donor program or your major donor program, but also how you can find new folks from the $5 to $50 level who can just step in and be a more consistent heartbeat for your missions. So I'm excited that you're all here. And I welcome you to enter into the chat as we get started, your name, organization, and where you're tuning in from, because I think it's fun to kind of feel the globalness of our community at the collective. So feel free to share that in the chat as we get started.
Like stop by for fun sometimes. Actually, see my
all right. Can everyone see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
We're good? Nodding of heads? Cool. That makes me happy. So welcome to today's conversation. Again, my name is Alyssa Wright. Today, we're going to be talking about creative ways that you can bring new donors into your organization. And again, if you want to learn more about Wright Collective, you can head to our website throughout today's call. We actually have some case studies on the website about bringing in new donorships. That might be helpful to you. And again, if everyone could just stay muted, that's really helpful. You can keep your video on, but just another note that this is being recorded today to be disseminated to folks. So today's agenda, again, let's do some welcome and introductions in the chat. So if folks want to chime in again with your name, organization, and location, I think that's really helpful. Maybe you'll find a friend or colleague in today's Zoom room. That's always happy. I'm going to share a couple core agreements because we will have a breakout group at the end of today's webinar where you'll be able to go and chat with your peers on what you heard during today's session. So just know that that's an opportunity to you if you want to stay on towards the end of the hour. We're actually going to talk through the definition of donor acquisition and what that means for your program and how you design a platform around it. And then we'll get more into the, again, creative ways that we are helping organizations at our firm to find new donors. We'll talk a little bit too about what we're learning at Wright Collective in this era that we're living in and this economy that we're all in as well, fundraising in this current economy. And then again, you'll have your breakout group and we'll do a quick closing together as a community. So our core agreements at the collective are really important to us. And again, if there's any others that you would like to add, feel free to put them into the chat. But for us, it's really important that we treat others as they would like to be treated and what they share with us about their identity and how they move through the world. Again, I'd appreciate everyone staying muted. This meeting is recorded and the breakout group will not be recorded. You can see everything that you need to say in the breakout group to your peers about the good, the bad, and the ugly, such as nonprofit life. But the main meeting space will be recorded for us to share with everyone who registered today. Make space and take space. So if you're in the breakout group and you're someone who tends to speak a lot, maybe make space for others to chat. And if you're someone who doesn't normally speak up, maybe make sure that your voice is heard. This is a really important discussion, as many organizations, I think, are struggling to find their next generation of donors. At the collective, we are committed to unlearning. So this is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. You're allowed to grow and think things you didn't used to, particularly about philanthropy and fundraising and how we raise the resources for our missions. Commit to not requiring that there's always going to be an answer. Maybe you leave today with more conversations that you have to have internally or with a question for yourself. I often tell folks when they come to our sessions that one of the aha moments that I've had folks write me afterwards or sort of chime in about at the end of the breakout group.
Good afternoon, this is Eva speaking. How can I help you?
Is that it can be really difficult to raise money for an organization that you don't feel fully committed to, that doesn't have a healthy culture and healthy leadership structure. And so it's really important as we go through today chatting strategy that we also keep culture in mind. And you each, all 55 of you awesome folks joining today, that you also keep in mind and remember that your one precious self as a great fundraiser is deserving of being in an organization that honors that. So I got into this field because I was really frustrated at how development folks were often treated while we were on our backs. It was required to bring in the entire budget. So I think it's really important today that, you know, if you're leaving with some extra questions about who you are, how you move through this work, what type of community the organization is building and culture, all of that comes up when we talk about bringing new relationships into the missions that we serve. And let's just respect the level of detail people will choose to disclose about their own growth and mindset, particularly in the breakout groups. And I'm a big fan of solidarity fundraising. If you haven't ever heard that term, look it up after today. It's important to collaborate whenever possible and not to compete. So one of the things we will talk about today is collaborative fundraising, where you can cross-pollinate donor networks with other organizations in your community. We found that particularly effective for clients over the last couple of years in helping 2 or 3 organizations to grow their donorship. So those are our core agreements. So I'm going to invite you to grab a piece of paper right now or in your notepad, or if you're super tech savvy, you can create a whiteboard or something. I'm a very sad millennial. I still don't know how to do that stuff. I draw a lot of things in notebooks. But get a sheet of paper and just put down next year's calendar year. And what I'd love you to do is just make some little boxes or just start taking some notes under each month of the year to really start to think, as I'm sharing some ideas today, how next year you could start to bake in some of these activities, who might be the lead on those, and then also what might be a goal that you have associated with each. So again, you know, if you can map a little bit with me as we go today, I think that'll be helpful when we get to the breakout group, because you can actually look at 12 months of activity and see the points wherein you could be bringing in new donors and relationships. Does that sound good? Do I get a round of emojis or a thumbs up in the box? Yeah. Yay. All right. Thank you all. All right, here we go. So before we dive into some of the creative ideas, I do want to talk about how we do this work. So this is like my favorite quote in the entire world. And I've based a lot of my personal and professional life off of this. But I think it's really important that you think about the community that you're building as having a certain feeling, having a vibe, feeling like a community, having a personality, people knowing what it feels like to be a part of your work, whether that means when they're, you know, at the food pantry stocking shelves with the team, or they're sitting in the boardroom meeting new board members as they join the board, when they sit down with the executive director for the first time, when they meet the administrative assistant, when they walk into the office and are there to take a meeting, or when they come to any of your fundraising events or activities. It's really important that people feel a certain way when they're in those environments, that they feel inclusive, creative, loving, inspired, they're positive, they have good energy. And I'm not saying that you always have to put on a face, because life is tough, but I definitely feel like it's really important that this is communicated and sort of held throughout your entire organization, because it's such an important part of development. So again, one of the things that I've kind of worked really hard over the years to make sure within the organizations that we support is that the community feeling is there and it's prominent. And it's really clear how people can be a part of that community. What it feels like for them to interact with a board member feels good and positive and inspiring. What it feels like for them to go and, you know, be a part of a volunteer day feels good and positive and inspiring. And so again, I think it's really important as we just move through this discussion today, that you think a little bit about how, again, you're creating spaces and opportunities for new people to step into the work where they're going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I haven't heard about this group for years in the community. Like, they're doing awesome things and these people are so committed. You want people to walk away having that feeling and that sense as being part of your organization. So just remember that people will probably forget what you said from the podium at your event, and they'll forget what the auction items were on the table, but they won't forget what it felt like to be in that room in your community. All right, so just a quick definition of donor acquisition for folks who might be new to fundraising today. So donor acquisition is the process of finding, attracting, and securing new donors within your organization. And one of the things that if you don't track at your organization, no matter how small, don't care if you're coming here today with 10 donors or 10,000, is that it's measured by the number of donors that you attain in a given time frame. So most organizations have it within their bandwidth and their capacity to only do this on an annual basis, which is totally fine. But even if you can start doing it 2 times a year, it's really helpful to be able to see how many new donors are consistently coming into your organization. This also is a really good indicator of, again, how you're building community, how you're reaching new audiences, how you're fulfilling mission in new and different ways. So again, it's just really important for you to be aware of what donor acquisition is and to make sure that it's not every appeal that goes out isn't just the usual suspects, or every social media campaign that you run isn't the same people on social giving, but that every time you're slowly and incrementally getting new folks to step into the work. Again, new folks at any giving level. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they're stepping in as major donors or monthly donors, but it could just be new folks that are coming in to make a $5 or $25 gift for the first time. But they're walking in and they're paying attention. All right. So let's get into some creative ways. So I'm going to share the first and foremost, I feel like it's the golden rule of donor acquisition. Anyone who's worked with me knows this, but you need to go to where people are in your community. You cannot expect that folks in the community are going to come to you. So again, I see a lot of organizations that put all this energy into events and activities and their own newsletters and all that type of stuff. And while that's great to speak to the audience that you currently have, you can't expect that people are going to come into your, they're going to be signing up for your newsletter just out of the blue, or that they're going to be coming to your event just because it was in the local newspaper. They don't know you yet. So one of the ways in which we've had a lot of success over the years at our practice in terms of finding new donors and bringing them into the work is by doing a few of these things that I've listed here today. The first is whatever the new local it spot is, the new restaurant that opened, the expanded brewery in town with a really beautiful patio that everybody wants to sit on, the boutique, children's clothing shop where all the new moms are going to shop in town, whatever that new it spot is where people are going, how you create a partnership with them to get in front of their audience. And it could be something as easy as asking if your nonprofit can set up a table out front, wondering if on Giving Tuesday you could do a cookout in the parking lot and people could hear about your organization and donate through a QR code. But don't expect that, again, people are going to come to your own events. You need to go out into the community where they are. The other thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is family-friendly activities. So I see a lot of, in my community here in Southern Maine in particular, a lot of grandparents who are watching their grandchildren during the day who are looking for things to do in the area. A lot of families on the weekend that want to go for hikes. So again, thinking about family-friendly activities that you could do, maybe you partner with, one of the local parks or land trusts or a community space, you rent it or something. But going out again into the community to offer something to the community instead of expecting them to come to your facility or just come because it's, your organization's event. Another thing is look at that town calendar. I mean, every time we get a new client, I go and look at the city and town calendar and I understand what the festivals, the marches, the road races, the things that are already happening in the community are, and then how can we partner with those? So we've had a lot of clients over the years who for around a certain holiday when there's activities in town, the fireworks on the 4th of July, they go and actually set up a table or they do a kids arts activity, or they do a wine tasting or something at that community event. So be thinking about what those activities are that already happen in your community and how you can go partner with them. The other thing is partnerships. So I'm a big fan of solidarity fundraising. The largest grant that I ever wrote, a $5 million grant that I was part of stewarding and putting together with a couple of colleagues, was for 3 organizations going in together on splitting that $5 million grant. So again, Think about partnerships. How could you partner with two other organizations that are doing service work in the social service work in the area and do a collaborative culinary cook-off together, or um, host a donor dinner for all of your major donors together in community focused on a particular topic on National Philanthropy Day, which is coming up on November 11th. Really think about those partnerships. And here's something that I also think is really funny. And the more that you fundraise, the more that you recognize this, especially if you're like a local or regional organization. The 1% is not a big community. So, especially if you're working in like high net worth or the major gift space, you will find that you're all talking to and probably all have the same 5 to 7 donors on your lists. So, I think it's really important to be thinking about that. And again, if you both know you know, Jack Smith, who is, the hospitality person in the area and knows all the restaurants on Main Street, how could you and another organization or you and a couple organizations approach them about doing something together? So again, partnerships can be really successful in this space. And I'm seeing more and more organizations realize that we all have to work together to help all boats rise. And often donors are also saying, this is awesome. We love that you all are collaborating. And so they're giving more to the individual organizations because they see that collaboration. And the last piece is going to other nonprofit events and supporting people in the community. So often, I've struggled sometimes with figuring out like who the corporate players are in a new area when we get a new project. And so, one of the things I'll often tell board members to is go to other nonprofit events in the community, get a sense of who's the person for different companies, get a sense of what they're supporting. And if they're a match to what your work is or your particular mission is, don't be afraid to have a follow-up conversation with them after meeting them at another event. Also, don't go to your friend's nonprofit events and like walk right up to their major donor and ask them for a gift at your friend's nonprofit event. That's pretty creepy. But definitely feel like you can go to events and build relationships. I think that's really important. All right. So here's another thing that's actually like a smart revenue generator for organizations. So again, I feel like sometimes nonprofits forget that they can also earn money too. It doesn't just have to be purely philanthropic. And if you pick a constituency that is, willing to pay a higher price point for a certain experience or workshop, you might be able to offer something really meaningful. So an example of this, and it kind of leads into this top bullet point, is using the skills of your board members to host some kind of meaningful workshop or training that's sponsored by your organization in the community. So we have a board member on one of the boards of an organization we work with that is a really prominent lawyer around immigration law. And so we're working with them to design an offering to attorneys throughout the entire state focused on them sharing their knowledge and giving kind of this professional skill building workshop. And so they're going to sell tickets to it at a pretty significant price point, a couple of $100s. And if we can get 30 people in the room, that's a significant fundraiser. And again, a way to acquire new donors in a very aligned way. So think about the skills of your board members. I've often done, fundraising workshops when I've been on boards or advisory groups, because that is also like another skill that people might want to build, and you might get people to buy tickets and then go back to the organization. Local influencers or brands could do something really cool for you and host a workshop. So again, I've seen, we had an influencer a little while back that did something on digital branding and like how to promote your brand on TikTok, or like an intro to TikTok kind of thing. And the organization sold tickets and made a good amount of money and got a lot of new followers from that workshop. Showcase in the same way with board members, you could showcase a donor's talent or skills. One of my favorite donors to an organization in Chicago is a chef. And every year she does a very private culinary class in her apartment in Chicago. And they sell the tickets for a pretty high price point, and it sells out every year. So again, think about your donors and your network and what they could offer. And so again, this is kind of going beyond maybe the $50 or $100 ticket as well. Maybe you could do something that again could be more like $500 to $1,000 a ticket, because someone sees it as a very unique opportunity or as professional development for themselves. And then lastly, bring in a performer or some kind of trainer. So again, if you want to do a wellness workshop, maybe you bring someone in to do a workshop on Reiki, or or some other sort of thing in the wellness space. Maybe you bring in a performer, you have a poet come in to write, to do a poetry workshop, and you sell those tickets in the community. So again, you can kind of think about different ways to access new and different donors based on the skills or the experience that you're offering in the community. Incentivize them to give. So this is my favorite email that I've gotten in the last week. Shout out to the Mabel Wadsworth Center, which is a feminist healthcare center in the state of Maine, for how awesome this was. I was very excited when I got this in the mail. I totally chose a monthly level because I wanted a tote bag. But this is a really cool way, again, to sort of incentivize new donors to come in by putting them in more of like a transactional mentality. The holidays are coming up. It's a great time for people to buy swag as gifts for people in their community and network. And if you're going to do that, I love what Mabel did with tying it into a monthly donation and not just a one-off gift. So again, think about not only the swag items that could incentivize people to give, but also the community partnerships that you could develop to incentivize folks to give. And what I mean by that is maybe you partner with the local brewery, and everyone who gives $100 or more gets a drink ticket and a custom glass when they go to the brewery. Maybe you do something where it's, again, like a piece of artwork that was really catalytic from the year, and everyone who gives 250 or more gets a copy of that print artwork signed by the artist. So just, really think about ways that you can incentivize donors to give. Sometimes when folks see that on social media, they see it as more of a something that they're purchasing before they think about it as philanthropy. And so again, that'll just get them in your network, getting your regular communications, and hopefully learning more about your mission and wanting to give more philanthropically over time. I love me some swag items. I'm a big fan. So bringing healthy urgency to social media. So the other thing just to kind of think about is obviously a new way to acquire donors is through social media. And I'm just getting a little bit more detailed and nuanced here because I think it's really important. So the big thing that I see people make as a mistake with social media is they pre-plan it, set it, and forget it. And they're only speaking about themselves and to their current people. So as an organization, I think it's really important that you bake in how you stay relevant and you're timely. If something happens in the country or the state that you're working in, and you're not immediately addressing it and tying some sort of solicitation to it, you're probably missing out on an opportunity to get that captive audience that's reading about another issue or another thing that's going on, to pay attention and to tune in and to actually potentially give. So a good example of this, and again, this is not like I think you should be also mindful of not being opportunistic when it's crisis related, or it could be a really grief-filled story for a certain population or community. But I think one of the things that I like is when this is rooted in really positive, cool stuff that happens too. So I know that throughout the years, whatever country won the Miss Universe pageant, like we used to be like, hey, like Miss Ethiopia won, and all our programs are in Ethiopia, and we're giving a shout out to her, and hoping that we can get some new donors this month to support the future for women and girls in Ethiopia, just like this leader. So again, being aware of what's sort of happening throughout your region or throughout the globe is really important, and making an authentic connection to potentially acquire new donors. Because the people that might be watching the Miss Universe pageant might not necessarily be the people who have ever invested in girls' education in East Africa. But they might be folks, again, that once they see that, they make a gift for the first time, and now they're sort of listening and learning alongside you more. Think about a creative social media campaign that could be really like additive to folks. So one of my favorite clients for a couple years ran like a full week social media campaign of recipes from West Africa. And I just always thought it was so fun. Like I learned about new spice blends, how to make mocktails and cocktails with different spices. And I learned about a whole different sort of culinary culture. And I think that brought them a lot of new donors because people were actually just looking at the recipes. And so again, it was something that met people where they're at. The working parent who's trying to figure out something new to cook for the family, or the Gen Zer who's trying to figure out a series of mocktails or cocktails to make for a party coming up. So again, it tapped into different audiences, but it met people where they're at. I've seen a lot of organizations, based on whatever your mission is, sort of writing to a parent audience these days. And I think that's really interesting. Millennials and Gen Xers are acquiring some wealth as we get older. I'm technically now an elder millennial. That's fun. And so sometimes I've gone and read like a series of tips around parenting and been like, oh my gosh, that's from an organization that is promoting healthy sexuality in India. Now I'm following that organization. So again, thinking about like a creative social media campaign that you could run that gives people other advice or tips or stories or things that aren't necessarily soliciting, but it gets them to pay attention, and then you start to bake in some opportunities to donate. And then creating timed opportunities. So again, in the next 24 hours, we're giving away this, or you have this unique opportunity. People tend to pay attention to that. They don't want to miss out. And just engaging in fun competitions or gaming. I was thinking next spring about doing one on gaming and fundraising, because it is like a really lucrative space right now. And I think a lot of organizations don't know how to do it in a low to no cost kind of way. But gaming is becoming a really big place to acquire new donors, to get people to either come online digitally or physically out in the community, be a part of different activities. So think about how you could do some competitions or gaming on social media. I literally voted on who was the cuter puppy for an animal shelter, and it was like, make a $5 donation, vote on the cuter puppy, and then you get a sticker of it in the mail. I totally fell for that and did it, and now I'm on their donor list. All right. So the other thing that I want to kind of talk just a little bit about is going beyond just like corporate engagement or sponsorship. So one of the things that I've had a lot of success over the last few years is actually going and talking to the affinity groups at local companies. So there's women's affinities groups, there's racial justice affinity groups, there's different regions like, you know, UK versus the US versus the Canadian offices might have affinity groups. So talking to those affinity groups at local companies and hosting a fun event or workshop. So again, I tend to find that things around food and culture people really enjoy, or the arts. So again, could you go in and like, you know, talk about the culinary culture in the region where you work? Could you go in and do an arts oriented activity that's something that you do in your youth program? You know, what's maybe something you could go in as an entry point to offer an experience to these affinity groups, but then also talk about the mission. Feedback I've gotten from companies over the years is that it's really hard when nonprofits just come in and they have like their PowerPoint and they share their mission and vision, and then they put a one pager in front of you and say, become a board member or give a donation. Those aren't fun. People don't really like to sit through those. So try to find a way to maybe be a little bit more creative so that folks remember, oh, that's that group that came in and like, we made the paper mache, whatever, and learned about their program in, in East Africa. So just try to think about, again, like something that is memorable, that's an experience for folks. I also think that, you know, engaging leadership is really important. So I have asked the CEOs or trustees of different companies to come and discuss a certain topic with our nonprofit. So I know throughout the country, we're in this affordable housing crisis right now. And so I've actually had leaders in the corporate community who are very passionate about that come to panels that our clients have designed on those topics and share what they're seeing, what they're hearing from their employee base, what they feel like their responsibility is as a company. But you could design a virtual panel discussion like that and very easily invite someone from a local company to come. And then there's sort of more of a captive audience. If you're working nationally or internationally, and it's tough to do that, one of the things that you might think about doing is just inviting them to do a social media live. And that is magical because then you also cross-pollinate their followers with your followers. And we had a client a couple of years ago that did that with Levi Strauss. And it was just really amazing to like have this brand with this organization. I think they got like something like 30,000 followers within the few days surrounding that Instagram live. So don't be afraid to cross-pollinate networks to acquire new followers and new donors in that sort of way. And then you can always create like a really meaningful partnership or package together. I know that, you know, we used to partner with some ethical brands over the years, and again, sort of cross-pollinate audiences with them to have them make the candles that we gave to our donors at the donor dinner, or create the tote bags or the t-shirts for the women's luncheon or whatever it might be. So again, that's a nice way, like you could sort of engage local companies in your work in a more meaningful way. All right. Next up is, and it kind of just tapped into this a little bit with our last discussion, but also remember that you can grab the mic, you can grab the microphone, and you can create your own event or panel or community conversation, and you can invite high profile, affluent, influential people to be a part of it as a way to start to build a relationship with them. So this is again where maybe it's National Philanthropy Day, which I'm just naming because it's top of mind. It's coming up in November. But maybe for National Philanthropy Day, you think about 3 prominent philanthropists that are always in the newspaper in Boston, and your organization sends them a letter and says, we want to do a virtual panel talking about the state of philanthropy, particularly when it comes to these series of human services or social service offerings that we provide, and we wanted to invite you to be a speaker. So again, think about how you can, just again, think out of the box and find some different ways to bring influencers together. I also think it's really good for you to think about like who's going to bring a good audience. That's the right audience that you want to be in front of. Sometimes it's not just a high profile person. Sometimes it's someone who, again, might be a little more niche, but is exactly the values aligned sort of partner that you want to be bringing into your work. And then, again, thinking about how you can promote on social media and other marketing to cross-pollinate the networks. I also think that, the personalized invitation sent out is really beautiful and lovely if you can mail one, or you can send like a really nice, well-written email. So just again, thinking about how it isn't just a sort of like, we're hosting an event, we're looking for panelists, would you consider it? But make it story-driven, make it personal, why you're doing it, why you want to invite them right now in 2023 to have this particular topic, what difference you think it would make for your community to be able to hear from them, and also what you'd really like them to share, because they might have things to share with your community that could also be of value. So don't be afraid to design your own panel discussion of influencers in the community as a way to get their networks more engaged in what you're doing at your organization. So those are our creative ideas for today. And I'm just going to switch over to, and I won't say glass half empty, but just being realistic for a minute. So what if you're trying all of these things to get new donors and nothing's working? You get like 1 new donor a quarter and you're really, really struggling. So I always say that if you're trying all these things, and if you're being really intentional with planning them and executing them well, but for some reason it doesn't feel like people are converting to donors, or that people are coming into the work financially, I often think, or I know, that has to do more with the human dynamics and the culture that surrounds your organization than it probably has to do with you having a really good strategy and a calendar of things and activities to execute on. So just always check in with yourself and your organization. And are you creating a culture and an environment that donors want to step into? Are you building a community that people are excited and inspired to be a part of? Or are you just sending out digital e-blasts and organizing, tables at an event and, hand putting little personal thank yous on appeal letters? Are you creating a space where people get so excited to be a part of it? They have things they look forward to doing alongside you. They realize and understand the impact of their giving. Do they really feel like part of a community? And the transformation that I feel like I've seen in our sector from when I started 15, 16 years ago now up until today is that we used to just do that for high net worth individuals. And now I think there's been an awakening and a realization that every donor that steps into your work matters profoundly. I saw organizations in 2020 that were literally looking back at their donor bases, and some of their longest term donors weren't the ones that cut the biggest checks. They were the ones that gave $5 a month or $50 a year for 10, 15, 20 years to keep the organization going. So just really think about this culture piece. And think about it for yourself, because if you're not giving 100% or 110% on those days when you're inspired, why aren't you also doing that as well, right? So I always can feel into a project when I'm like, oh shoot, like these 3 things that I really needed to have change have not have not changed in the last 9 months. And so I don't feel that extra motivation, that extra inspiration to do an additional event, to go to a speaking engagement, to, stay up that extra hour at night to send out a digital blast or whatever it might be. So the culture impacts you as well. And so that's why, again, I got into this work because I think development folks are often not treated as well as they could be. So just keep your one precious self in mind as you move through this as well. So shared responsibility for development, you and 2 other people, 1 to 3 people, should not all be responsible for all the fundraising activities. All the things that I named today, that could be a team of 10 to 15, each taking on one and working or volunteering, 10 to 15 hours a year to help that event or activity be successful. So again, there's shared responsibility for development. That's the only way you're going to do a lot more prospecting and stewardship to try to bring in new donors and upgrade new donors over time. Your mission is really clear. Everyone knows what your mission is, and there's mission alignment and integration into everything you do. And there's really strong donor relationships. So I always tell the story that when I got my 1 pager to go out and fundraise on the Upper West Side of New York for a girls school at the time, an all girls school at the time. I remember it said on the paper, remember both of her daughters went to Yale after. She likes chamomile tea and don't touch her dog. And that was strong donor relationships at the time. That was what the organization knew about her. And so I think we've evolved so much beyond that transactional way of thinking about people. Do you really know your donors? Do you know what breaks their heart? Do you know what motivates them? Do you know what wealth they have access to? And not just financial wealth, but social and political and intellectual capital that they could bring to the mission? Do you really have strong donor relationships? Because if you don't, it's going to be really difficult with some of the ways that I just discussed earlier. When you bring these current donors into the new donor spaces, you need to be really clear on why you're bringing them there and how it's part of them having a fulfilling experience too. And then lastly, fundraising is always engagement. So donors are so much more than a checkbook, each and every one of us. And so it's really important that there are other opportunities, time, talent, connections, things that also can be brought to the table. So donors feel like it's more than just a transaction with your organization. Just a stop point before we move on, and a reminder that yes, while you might feel like household giving is down, there's still about $500 billion that moves around our ecosystem in the United States every single year. That's a B. So just always be mindful of that. When you're, nervous about going out to try to raise $20,000 or $30,000 in a campaign, or you're trying to, sign on 10 people to be $25 monthly donors at a corporate lunch and learn. And just again, another reminder that we have to get really good at interacting with and bringing in individuals and families, because it does make up the bulk of this space in our country. So we're going to head into a breakout group for folks that want to stay on and participate in the breakout group. Before you do sign off today, I'd love you to just throw into the chat one takeaway or one lesson learned or something as an action item, maybe that you're going to leave with to start up and try. So feel free to add that into the chat. And our next free lunchtime class will be on March 6th. And we're going to talk at that point about how to find fundraising success with your spring and summer events. Most organizations have folks that come into the community, seasonal residents that come in the spring and summer, or the weather gets a lot nicer maybe at that point. And so you're thinking about how you're engaging people out of doors. But we're going to talk a little bit also too about how that's the real engagement time of the year. So how can you use the spring and summer as you kind of move into the fall and winter of 2024? If you can believe it, I'm already planning for September 2024. That's how some of us fundraisers try to really plan. So we will be talking about that in our next session, and I hope that you can join us. So for those of you that are still with us, I'm going to break us into breakout groups, and we'll come back from the breakout groups. And if we're going for 10 minutes, we'll come back for 10 minutes. And then hopefully we'll get a little bit of time to share in the group together before we sign off at 1 o'clock. Thank you all for being here. All right. Here we go.